From lard, a cooking fat humans used safely for thousands of years, suddenly being labeled dangerous after a few decades of anti-saturated fat campaigns, to GMO crops, organisms whose DNA is engineered in laboratories to create traits nature never intended being promoted as miracle solutions for global hunger, to vitamins marketed as modern-day magic capable of fixing everything your lifestyle cannot. These ideas sounded scientific, reasonable, even obvious. So obvious that you never thought to question them. But here lies the uncomfortable truth. You weren't just taught how to live, you were taught what to believe. And those beliefs didn't come from nature or pure science. They were shaped by massive systems that understand exactly what you will trust if it's repeated long enough. Everything shifts the moment you ask a single question. Who benefits when your beliefs change? For your entire life, you've been guided by truths so familiar they became unquestionable. What you're about to hear isn't a conspiracy. It's simply the part of the picture you were never shown. And in the next 10 minutes, the world of food, health, and environmental common sense you thought you understood may never look the same again. To understand how lard, once a staple in every American and European kitchen, suddenly became a public enemy, we have to look back at the moment when industrial vegetable oils were trying to enter the market. Soybean oil, cottonseed oil, corn oil. These were new products produced in massive quantities but without a strong consumer base. And in business, when you can't prove your product is better, the next best strategy is to make the alternative look worse. Lard became the perfect target. It was cheap, traditional, widely used, and crucially, it couldn't be patented. Industrial oils, on the other hand, could be refined, branded, and marketed as modern solutions. Soon, the public began seeing slogans warning about saturated fat, diagrams of clogged arteries, and simplified scientific claims that painted all animal fats as inherently dangerous. The evidence at the time was far from conclusive, but repetition, especially when backed by advertising budgets, has a way of transforming uncertainty into unquestioned truth. The same fat that fed generations suddenly became a symbol of heart disease, even though public opinion shifted faster than the science ever did. Bottles of vegetable oil appeared on store shelves with labels like heart healthy, modern, and cholesterol-free, creating the impression of a nutritional revolution, even though the refining process behind these oils was far more complex than a jar of rendered lard. The point here isn't whether lard is good or bad. The point is how a 1,000-year-old cooking tradition can be erased and replaced not by scientific consensus, but by marketing narratives, repetition, and a compelling story. And the effects of that story still shape how we eat today. We like to believe science is neutral, that data stands alone, untouched by agendas. But the last century revealed a far more complicated reality. Science doesn't move without funding, and funding shapes the questions that get asked, the experiments that get run, and the conclusions that reach the public. When the vegetable oil industry needed to position itself as heart-healthy, early studies on saturated fat emerged, studies with small samples and weak evidence, yet promoted to the public as definitive truth. When processed food companies wanted to protect their products, research conveniently shifted blame away from sugar and toward fat, turning fat into the villain, while other factors quietly disappeared from the conversation. And when pharmaceutical companies sought new markets, studies on multivitamins, cholesterol, and statin drugs were crafted with clear narratives in mind, narratives that later appeared in headlines as if they were objective discoveries. The frightening part isn't that science makes mistakes, it's that those mistakes, once repeated enough, harden into facts the public never thinks to question. Most people never read scientific papers, they read headlines. That's where complex data becomes simplified into short, memorable statements, easy to spread, easy to believe, but lacking context. A small, industry-funded study can become national news overnight, simply because it aligns with the story an industry wants to tell. And each time science is filtered through that process, it doesn't just shift public opinion, it reshapes how millions of people eat, shop, medicate, and live. Science itself isn't the problem. Science taken out of context and amplified by media to serve a financial narrative is what makes it nearly impossible for the public to tell the difference between genuine evidence and evidence that has been gently guided toward a predetermined conclusion. To understand how the pharmaceutical industry truly works, you have to start with a simple truth. In business, profit doesn't come from solving a problem once it comes from keeping customers forever. Apply that logic to human health, and the picture becomes far more uncomfortable. Life-saving drugs absolutely exist, but they are not where the industry makes most of its money. The real profits come from products you take again and again daily: statins, lifelong blood pressure pills, multivitamins every morning, sleep aids, mood stabilizers. Not all of these are useless, but their popularity is driven not only by medical necessity, but by the narrative built around them. You need this to prevent disease, you need that to avoid deficiency. The modern body can't cope on its own anymore. And most of these fears don't come from your doctor, they come from advertisements, wellness campaigns, and carefully crafted messaging designed to make you feel slightly incomplete. In an industry where constant growth is required, innovation isn't always about creating new cures. Sometimes it's about redefining the problem so that existing products suddenly feel essential. That's how terms like micronutrient deficiency, bad cholesterol, or mild disorder enter public consciousness. Easy to understand, easy to personalize, and most importantly, easy to sell solutions for. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't need you to be sick, it only needs you to believe you're not fully healthy. And in a world where healthcare increasingly revolves around pills rather than lifestyle, it becomes harder and harder to tell what your body truly needs versus what the market needs you to buy. The unsettling part isn't that drugs exist, it's that every fear related to your health can be turned into a revenue stream if the story behind it is convincing enough. GMO was once presented as a breakthrough in agriculture. Crops that resisted pests, produced higher yields, and could feed millions. On the surface, it sounded convincing, scientific, efficient, humanitarian. But beneath that narrative lies a very different system, not built around feeding the world, but around owning the foundation of the world's food supply. What makes GMO transformative isn't just genetic engineering, it's the legal structure behind it, patented seeds. For thousands of years, farmers saved part of their harvest to plant the next season. With GMO seeds, that age-old practice became a copyright violation. Each cycle, farmers must purchase new seeds not because biology demands it, but because the licensing contracts do. Seeds stopped being a part of nature and became intellectual property, regulated like software, and this is where the story shifts. When you control the seed, you don't just control the farmer, you control the entire food chain. In many regions, GMO seeds come bundled with specific fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides, all produced by the same corporations. What is advertised as higher productivity often translates into higher dependency. Soil becomes overworked, pests grow resistant. Farmers spend more each season just to maintain output, while the majority of profit flows upward to the companies selling the inputs. GMO itself isn't the villain, the science is remarkable. The issue is how that science has been deployed, not as a tool of empowerment, but as leverage within a system of industrialized agriculture. The danger isn't in the modified gene, it's in the structure that gene enables. A model where seeds, once the birthright of every farmer, become a mechanism of global economic control. And once that shift happens, the question isn't, are GMOs safe? The real question becomes, who decides what you grow, what you eat, and ultimately what you believe? For years, we've been told that the world is entering a new green era: electric cars, recycled plastics, clean energy, carbon credits, each presented as a collective movement to save the planet. But what most people never notice is that environmentalism didn't just become a global priority, it became a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And when saving the planet turns into a marketplace, the story changes. Carbon credits, marketed as a tool to reduce emissions, have quietly become a new kind of currency controlled by major financial institutions. A factory can continue polluting as long as it purchases enough credits. A corporation can declare itself carbon neutral while changing almost nothing about how it actually operates. In this system, green isn't an outcome, it's a label. Recycling is no different. Few people realize that most plastic waste from wealthy nations isn't recycled domestically. It's exported to poorer countries where it ends up in open dumps, burned without regulation, or sorted by children working in toxic conditions. The entire structure relies on a simple psychological truth. As long as consumers feel they're doing something good, the machinery behind the scenes doesn't have to change. And that leads to the uncomfortable reality. Environmentalism today is not just a scientific mission, it's a business model. One that profits from making us believe that buying more green products is the same as saving the planet. But the planet doesn't need marketing, it needs actual change. And once you can tell the difference between the two, you'll see that many green solutions are little more than a polished story built to keep a much larger system running. We're taught that recycling is a symbol of responsibility, that if we sort our waste, place our bottles in the blue bin, and follow the rules, those materials will be transformed into something new and useful. But the truth is far less comforting. Most of the waste we proudly label as recycled is never recycled at all. Instead, it's packed into shipping containers, sent across oceans, and dumped into countries that lack the infrastructure to manage it, while wealthy cities in the US and Europe appear cleaner and greener. Villages in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South Asia become the final destination for the plastic that Western consumers believe they've recycled. There, the plastic isn't reborn, it's burned in open pits, washed into rivers, or sorted by impoverished workers, sometimes children, in fields of toxic waste. And this system persists because of one powerful psychological comfort. The consumer feels good when they drop something into a recycling bin. That feeling I'm doing the right thing becomes a moral shield that hides a supply chain no one wants to examine. In many cases, recycling isn't an environmental solution. It's a transfer of responsibility where waste is shipped to places with fewer resources and fewer voices. And when you step back, the issue isn't just the trash, it's the realization that a system can keep functioning as long as it convinces you you're helping. Meanwhile, the landfills on the other side of the world tell a different story, one where recycling has become a polished term, masking a global imbalance in who deals with the consequences of modern life. When you step back from Lard, turn into a villain, to guided science, to lifelong pharmaceuticals, to GMO seed ownership, to the global outsourcing of waste, you begin to see something clearly. The truth was never hidden. It was always there, simply buried beneath stories polished enough to keep you from ever questioning them. The system never had to lie to you, it just had to offer a version of reality that felt easier, more comfortable, more convenient. In a world drowning in information, the most dangerous distortions aren't the ones you never hear, they're the ones you hear so often that you stop noticing them. But every system has a weakness. Once you start seeing, you can't unsee. Once you understand how narratives are built, you stop being guided by them. Once you recognize the real cost of convenience, you begin to choose differently. And when enough people start looking directly at how things work, old narratives lose their power. Maybe we can't change the entire system overnight, but we can reclaim the most important thing, the right to question. Because the moment you begin to ask real questions, the world no longer functions the way someone else told you it does. It begins to function the way you truly see it, and that is where every meaningful change starts.